Well, hello there everyone, my name is Amy, this is the Opinionated Woman, and welcome to Crafty Reads, the series where I craft or make some kind of art, and I tell you about the last 5 books that I've read. This one, the last time, I had a lot of fun adding the gold in where I could see patches existing, and then adding swirling like spirals and concentric circles in them. So what I want to do this time is darken up some of these patches that are a little less defined, so that I can do that the next time again. Because I really like how it came out. This last batch of books were really good. I am out of my reading slump now, thanks to a lot of these books that I read. And yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so at the end of the last Crafty Reads, I talked to you about The Dark Hours by Michael Connelly, which was part of my thriller reading blog. And the next book is the second half of that reading blog, and that's Girl Forgotten by Karen Slaughter. This is one of her new ones. And I usually get along very well with Karen Slaughter's books. This one wasn't as violent as the other ones were, if you wanted to know, but oh my gosh, this book was so freaking compelling. Andrea has just qualified as, I can't remember what they're called, some kind of marshal. I think it's the Marshal Service. It's American, I don't know. Okay, so she's just qualified for the Marshal Service, and she's been given a job to look after this judge that is getting death threats. She's an old woman. She's been on, she's a Reagan appointee, and yeah, she's receiving death threats. So Andrea is going off to as one of the people that is going to keep this judge safe. But on top of that, we have, so that's what's happening in the present, but in the past, we're getting the story of Emily Vaughan. And Emily Vaughan was pregnant, and on the night of her prom night, she was murdered. And no one was ever arrested for it, you know, no one ever found out who the baby's dad was. There was like a whole drama that went along with this, because like it was it the 50s or the 60s? 80s. It was the 80s, sorry. Oh my goodness. So it was the 80s. So obviously being pregnant and unwed, and I suppose she's also a teenager, was like very scandalous, especially since, as we find out later, it's not a spoiler, it just it links up with the story. The judge that Andrea is protecting is Emily's mother. So we have these two concurrent sort of mysteries going on, where Andrea is trying to figure out what is happening with this judge, like where all of these threats are coming from, but she's also trying to find out what happened to Emily Vaughan and who killed her, because while we're getting Emily trying to figure out the paternity of her child, and all of that in the 80s, we've got Andrea trying to dealing with the same characters that were in Emily's life at the time. So like her group of friends, we get to deal with as teenagers in Emily's timeline and as adults in Andrea's timeline, and the differences and not so much differences of these characters as they grew up is very interesting, and it always keeps you on your toes, because you're not 100% sure who is guilty of what here and what the hell is going on. And there's a hell of a lot of there's more action than I expected, though, even though this isn't like gory and gross like a lot of her other books, there is a lot of action in here. And Andrea is a character you get given. There's also another layer to this because of Andrea's family and the fact that she'd been in the witness protection program, and we get to hear a bit more about her family and stuff, to the point where I was hoping this was a series, because I would read Andrea's backstory as a book, like without a doubt. She's so compelling, like she's got such a complex family history that Karen Slaughter manages to bring into the book in such depth, even though like some of these characters in a lot of these types of thrillers do end up being a little bit more shallow. But Andrea had so much depth to her, and I just wanted to stick with her. And the way that it all comes together, the whole like big dramatic twist ending and everything, was absolutely top tier. Really recommend. Then I read the audiobook that saved me from my audiobook reading slump, and that's Monsterous Regiment by Terry Pratchett. If in doubt, go back to a classic. I was telling my family that I was having a problem with a reading slump, and they were like, well, why not try Terry Pratchett again? And I was like, oh yeah, I haven't read a Terry Pratchett in a while, and I know I haven't read all of his, because I read so many when I was a kid, but both, like two of my brothers actually said to me, you need to read the Monsterous Regiment, and I knew I hadn't read it. So I thought, let's pick it up. And oh my god, I'm so glad I did. Monsterous Regiment is basically like a Mulan story, but taken to a farcical level. So following Polly, who is going in search of her brother, who is in the army, and she hasn't heard from him, so she cuts off her hair and decides to dress like a boy. And the way that they describe her needing to be a man is just so freaking funny. Like the things that she needs to do, like farting with abandon and picking her nose, and adjusting her trousers. And then at one point in the story, she starts stuffing the front of her trousers with a pair of socks, and then she always says that the socks were doing the thinking. And it is so freaking funny, but some of the things that make this book so hilarious, I can't tell you because it would ruin, like, it would ruin a lot of the storyline. But let's just say that Polly gets into this regiment, this ragtag reject regiment of a bunch of like inexperienced young lads, a troll, an eagle, and even a vampire. And they go on, and we follow their story of them trying to make some kind of impact in this war that not really everybody knows what they're going to war for. It's just like this comedy of errors, and they're led by this like old gruff leader called Captain, I can't remember his name. Oh my god, names are terrible. Like, I'm just having one of those days today. I'm really sorry. Jackram. Captain Jackram is the guy that is in charge of them, and he's like this. Like, he's soft, but he and he has a soft spot for all the lads that he's like in charge of, but he's like an old grizzled like veteran, you know. And every part of the story was a fucking joy. It was so funny, and I highly encourage you to pick this one up if you haven't, because of the twists that happen throughout the story that just add to the storyline in the most wonderful way. Then I read a book that has been hyped so much, but I haven't been able to get hold of it yet, and that was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I freaking loved this book. I'm sure fucking everybody has heard about this book so far, but I'll give you a little lowdown anyway. This book is written like it's an interview for a documentary. So we get all of the different characters. So it's written like, you know, with the character name and their blurb of dialogue. And I thought that might be a bit clunky. It's not at all. You get the full fucking story, and you get the same event from like so many people's different perspectives. And it's so interesting to see how different events affected different people. So we're in the 70s. We're following Daisy Jones, who is like a bit of a nepotism baby, but also like has been very abandoned by her family. Made her way into the Hollywood scene very, very young, like way too early. And has started making waves because of her beautiful voice. And then we have the Six, which is fronted by Billy Dunn, and they're a band that are just starting to make waves. You know, they're coming out with their first album, touring, all of that kind of stuff, like doing the drinking and the drugging and things like that. Trigger warning for major drug use in this, because also Daisy on a bender 24/7. And these two bands, like Daisy Jones and the Six, come together during this one evening at a club, and it's magic. So they decide that they're going to get together and form Daisy Jones and the Six, and they're going to write an album together. And the majority of this follows that album writing process and the different interpersonal relationships between people and struggles with addiction and all kinds of different aspects like that. And it's so compelling. You just freaking flip. I read this in a couple of days. Like it was just, and I didn't read that much on each day, you know, so I ended up reading it really freaking fast. And it was just a wild ride. Like, I'm really glad it's been made on Amazon. Been made into a TV series. I think it would make a better movie, I think. But it's definitely like just watching the mechanics of writing an album. I really, really enjoyed that a lot. like the way that it's done and the different egos that are involved and the different tragedies that befall them at different times, and what the music scene was like at that time as well, because like it was wild back then. But I can see 100% what all the hype was about. I've got to the point where this just needs to dry now, so I'm just going to chat to you for the last 2 books. So the next book that Hugo, he's banging the window. So the next book that I read was Queen of the Tars by Hannah Alcaf. Hugo, you're in my shop, bud. So Queen of the Tars is a mystery that is set against the backdrop of a competitive Scrabble tournament, which was such a unique premise to me. I think I heard about this on Books of Lala's channel because she likes books about games, and I was like, a book based around Scrabble? That sounds great. And like, I didn't know there was competitive Scrabble. I mean, it makes sense, but like, I didn't even think about that. So this whole book has got like this backdrop of this nerdy, wordy kind of people, with every chapter starting with an unusual word that you could use in Scrabble, how many points it would get you, and the meaning. Following Nadua, and right at the beginning of the story, we are at, like, I think the culmination of a Scrabble tournament, and Nadua's best friend Trina is playing against this boy called Josh, and she drops dead on the board right at the end of the game. And nothing was really found out. They didn't figure out who did it. They didn't figure out why she died, you know, because she was very young. She's like a teenager. And then we flash forward a year into the future, where Nadia is now back in the competitive Scrabble scene after a year off, after recovering from, you know, her trying to heal after her friend's death. And she's come back to reclaim Trina's title, which was Queen of the Tars, because Trina was an absolute Scrabble legend. So Nadia wants to come back and basically just focus on the Scrabble and make sure she wins. But it's sort of coming back to haunt her, like being in contact with all these people that were around at the time of when Trina actually died. And she starts to get embroiled in trying to figure out what happened to Trina, as well as trying to solve a bunch of little weird events that keep happening throughout the current Scrabble tournament. So it becomes this like whirlwind mystery full of Scrabble tiles. And I thought it was just so well done, like really excellent YA. Doesn't need a romance to keep it going. And I thought the way it concluded was just excellent. Like, this was a really unexpected, great read. And then the last one is a little sneak peek into my South African reading vlog, and that is An Unusual Grief by Yewande Omatoso. This was recommended to me by a bookseller at the book lounge, and she was so right. Oh my gosh. So this follows Mojisola, whose daughter Yinka has just taken her life. Trigger warning for suicide in this book. And at the point where she killed herself, they were estranged. So she hadn't known like how her daughter was living. Mojisola lived in Cape Town, Yinka had moved to Joburg. So Mojisola flies to Joburg and stays in Yinka's apartment and sort of like envelops herself in Yinka's world. So like she even looks after her cat, you know. So there's like the everyday kind of things, like where she lived, how she dealt with her landlord, what she was doing for work, the art that she was doing that her mother knew nothing about. But there's also aspects of her life that I didn't expect Mojisola to uncover, let alone jump feet first into, so that she can really like, she almost, because she hadn't cried yet until very much later in the book, she hadn't cried. She's definitely trying to cope with her grief in any kind of way she can, and completely surrounding herself with her daughter's lifestyle is the way that she decides to do it. But because of the twist, and I can't tell you what the twist is like here, because it came out of nowhere for me and I was so surprised by it. But it was just absolutely fascinating, because it really is a very unusual grief, because not everyone's grief is the same. Everyone experiences grief in different ways, and we might look at it and go, what the fuck? But if it works for that person, it's not harming anybody, you know, there's nothing actually wrong with that. And I just thought that the way it was written was so beautiful, the way grief was explored was so artful and so subtle. And I really freaking enjoyed this book. And there you have it. That is the end of my crafty reads. At the end, in the next crafty reads, I'll start adding more gold to this and figure out what this piece is saying to me. But I hope you did enjoy that. Have you read any of these books? As always, let me know down below. If you want to support my channel, you can go onto my Kofi account, is linked down below. Just give me a little one-time tip. That would be much appreciated. And until next time, check it out.